Could you introduce us to you as a writer? What is your journey? What has your journey been like? And what are ways that we might find you outside of this context?
Thanks for having me. This is great. I've been writing for over 25 years. Kind of got really serious about it around 2012, I want to say. But I knew that I wanted to be a writer from basically 6th grade. After I read the book, The Crystal Shard by R.A. Salvatore, got way into reading. Pretty quickly after that, realized I want to do this. I want to be able to instill these same kind of emotions into people just by reading a book. So I started writing stories at a very young age. They were horrible, of course, but you learn. And I initially started writing fantasy, and then as my tastes in horror grew, because I've always been a fan of horror, but I didn't start reading a lot of horror until 9th or 10th grade, I want to say. That's when I really started digging into it. And then that's when I also kind of realized, like, okay, yeah, I want to write horror as well. So
what were you reading that really got you into horror back in 9th grade, 10th grade? What appealed to you back then?
Kind of I guess you call them classics, right? Like for our modern era, King, Kuntz, Bentley Little, Clive Barker. Of course, I eventually found Lovecraft, got into that. That's when I got really into cosmic horror, was reading Lovecraft. I really liked Bentley Little. There was something about his stories that were just always unnerving, and they're always about mundane things like, oh, the mailbox or the store or, the hotel, just weird things like that. And then they're just crazy bonkers stories. But
so who are you reading now? How have your taste changed over time? What interests you now? What do you got on your bookshelf?
Yeah, so I'm really, really into cosmic horror these days. So I'm reading, like Haley Piper, Mary Sangiovanni, Betty Rocksteady. There's a book that came out recently. I think it's Tell Me I'm Worthless. It was really good. Also, Catherine Silva is awesome. Caitlin Marceau is great. There's just so many awesome horror authors out there right now. It's amazing. It's a great time to be a horror fan.
Yeah, it's I don't know if it's just my perception or if there really is a renaissance in horror literature and film, but one of my favorite things that I've read about horror is Paperbacks from Hell, Grady Hendrix's nonfiction book about the development of the horror genre starting with the late 70s and going through the 80s and on into the 90s. And what I remember from that is the way I pictured horror as a kid was it was like very over the top and campy without always being jokey about it, just kind of being so ridiculous that it turned into camp. And then there seems like there was this gulf, and maybe it's just my awareness. Like there wasn't as much stuff happening in the 2000s as maybe I just came to be aware of it in the last decade or so. But it has felt like there's a huge renaissance. There's a lot of stuff on TV. It's interesting to me that there are at least 4 new horror movies that are coming out like in the summer, which seems like an unusual thing. Maybe I don't have it right, but is there a renaissance happening?
I feel like there is, for sure. And I think it's due to a couple different things. One, I think is because media has become so much more so accessible for people, right? You got all these different streaming services that are pushing things out. There's even a streaming service, Shudder, that's just horror specific now, and that wasn't there, even 5 years ago, 10 years ago?
Yeah.
I also think the indie horror scene is really exploding right now, and I believe there's a reason for that, and I think it's because it's become so difficult to break into the big 5 or whatever traditional publishing, that a lot of people have taken upon themselves to either self-publish or go with little smaller presses and whatnot, because there's so many different small presses out there, especially in the horror realm. But yeah,
one of those small presses is yours.
Yeah.
Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, so my press is Timber Ghost Press. I founded it in 2021, shortly after I retired from the military. We specialize in kind of the creepy, weird kind of stuff, and I find myself publishing more and more of that, like, just kind of weird, kind of disturbing stuff. I do prefer cosmic horror, but I publish more than cosmic horror as well. You got Timber Ghost Press, your press, is just started up, which is exciting. There's some other great ones out there too, like Tenebris, Ghost Orchid, Ghoulish Books is amazing. They're putting out good stuff. There's just so many different new, like, small presses out there, and it's great.
Yeah, it's super exciting. I hope to get to meet all the folks who are putting out horror. It's kind of like a private goal of mine is to just say hello and meet the people who are doing the thing that I admire so much.
Yeah, and that's the other thing too. Like, you go to the conventions like StokerCon, right? They're almost like most of them are there. So it's a great time to go mingle and meet in person these folks you may have been interacting with online or social media, and put a face to the name and, like, a personality behind it all.
Yeah.
Because it's hard, I think, to take social media alone or just internet type friendship and get a real feel for things. There is value with actually meeting with people, I believe.
Yeah, that seems right. So moving into your story for this collection, I believe it's Ambrosia, right?
Yep, Ambrosia.
And I wonder if you could introduce us to that story, and without spoiling it, talk to us a little bit about, maybe give us a peek behind the curtain about what you were thinking about while you wrote it, or what inspired you to write it, what was on your mind.
So Ambrosia is one of those stories where I came up with this idea, and I'm going to try not to spoil it as I talk. And it plays with one of the tropes of cosmic horror, right? Where, like, forbidden knowledge or the truth is way worse than we think it is, because ultimately that whole story is about finding out the truth at the end, and it's just this bleak outlook of what's really going on. And I've always enjoyed stories that take, like, one idea that society has, and in this case, the afterlife, right? And then turning it on its head. I remember a book by Stephen King, I think it's called Revival. Have you ever read that one?
No, I haven't.
It's kind of cool. It's a very long slog to get to a killer ending. It's one of those books where it's like, okay, yeah, there's these cool things happening, but there's just so much, like, kind of dull, like, in between, like, some pieces that it's kind of hard to get through, but the ending is so amazing. And I'd say maybe inspiration a little bit for Ambrosia. So
interesting. Okay, thank you for that. The next question I'm asking everybody that is really interesting about the variety of responses I'm getting is that when we tell people that we like to read horror or write horror, that certainly they have some idea in their head about what that means. But my wonder is, what does horror mean to you? If you were to give us, like, an operational or working definition of horror as a genre concept, what does that entail for you?
When I think about horror, I think about media that gets underneath my skin somehow, right? Something that's going to burrow in there, and I'm going to be thinking about it for weeks or months or even years later about what I've read or watched or listened to. Those kinds of stories. I mean, obviously, like, the easy definition of horror that I think a lot of people who don't understand, like, what horror really is, blood and guts and all that, that's an aspect of some horror, right? Definitely there's a whole subgenre that's basically splatterpunk or body extreme horror, that kind of gets into that realm. The slasher movie that we were talking about earlier, before we started recording. And that's definitely a valid form of horror, but the ones I like are those slow burn, quiet, atmospheric horror pieces, like the movie The Witch. Have you seen that one?
I actually just saw it for the first time last week, and it was really good.
Yeah, I love The Witch, just mainly because of the atmosphere that's around the whole thing.
Yeah.
They did really good shooting that film and presenting it in such a way that it is unnerving, right? Even though there's not a whole lot happening in a lot of the scenes, there's just enough.
There's an implication.
I always thought it'd be kind of interesting too, and maybe make the movie better if we never see the witch, and we don't have that whole scene at the end, because then it leaves that question of, like, is what's happening really, like, because of a witch, or is it because of just they're kind of descending into madness?
And I wonder, this is the kind of thing that if this were a film being shown at Sundance and we were to get to ask our audience questions, we could ask the creators. But if I were to sit down with them, I would love to ask them the same thing, because I wonder, it's the sort of thing that you might imagine a screenwriter writing it without the ending scene and then somebody giving them notes and telling them, I think we really need an explanation or
Sure,
something.
yeah. You never know.
So I'm curious about that. I always wonder about the process by which we
Mhm.
arrive at these stories, but it was fantastic with or without the ending. It was really,
Oh, for sure, yeah. No,
yeah.
I enjoy it quite a bit.
I like when we talk about those slow burn movies and stories. The film called Speak No Evil, which is being
Hmm.
remade as an American English speaking film, English language film for release this fall. It was originally called Gastern, just like
Mhm.
the guests. It was made with Danish and Dutch language speakers as well as with some English. The film is about a couple that meets another couple on a vacation. They're in Tuscany or something in the first few minutes, and the couple is very friendly, and they have this kid. Each couple has a kid,
Mhm.
and the couple that they meet in Tuscany, the child doesn't speak, and
Hmm.
like the father explains, like, oh, he was like born without a tongue. It's kind of a
Hmm.
creepy scene just by itself. And at the end, they say, hey, we're, now very friendly with one another. We've been having these meals together at the family style Tuscany tables and at the bed and breakfast. Let's exchange information. We can visit one another maybe. You're in Denmark, we're in Holland. It's an easy drive. Come and visit us in the countryside. And basically, the film explores what happens. What is the director said this, the writer and director said this afterward. What is the worst possible way that could go? Uh, and I just love that premise because it's happened to if you've traveled abroad, you've come across people that you really clicked with, and you thought, maybe they could come for a visit. I could help them out. They could come see my hometown,
Mhm.
or vice versa. And this movie takes that very realistic thing and then plays it out in the worst possible way.
Oh no.
Yeah, and it is a slow burn. Nothing. It's unnerving, and it is constant tension building. And so I'm not going to spoil it, but it's definitely worth your time. I also believe that it's streaming now,
Hmm.
so it's something to look out for.
Yeah, I have to check it out.
Easily my favorite movie of the 2021 or 2022 class of horror films at Sundance. I usually see them all. So,
Nice.
yeah, all the horror ones. I try to see all the horror movies. Okay, so I appreciate that definition of horror, and I appreciate the nuance. A lot of folks will say horror is just whatever scares you, and then I think I don't like to be scared is the truth of it.
Mhm.
But I like to be unsettled. There's
Right.
like this line I don't necessarily want to cross, and then I don't like the horror that crosses that line into actually
Mhm.
scaring me.
Well, that's an interesting point too. Like, I don't get scared easily anymore. I've ingested so much horror now that books and movies just don't really scare me too much anymore. Every now and then one will pop up, and I don't count jump scares; those are different.
Yeah,
Um, I'm
those
talking.
are surprises, really,
I'm
right?
talking about like, oh, I'm nervous now. I want the light on over here, or, that kind of thing.
Yeah,
Very rarely happens anymore, but unnerving me does
yeah.
happen.
I
And
kind of seek that. I seek that.
yeah, and being scared is very subjective, right? What scares me may not scare you, and vice versa. So when someone says like, "Oh, I want a book that's going to scare me," it's like I don't know what to recommend you because I don't know what scares you or how easily you're scared, or
Right.
so. But I can recommend books that will unnerve you for
Yeah,
sure.
definitely. And the off script question, what was the last thing you read or saw that really did scare you?
Really did scare me, man.
Yeah. The last one that really got me was The Ring in
No, yeah.
2006 or 5.
Hmm.
Uh, I saw it 3 or 4 times the week it came out, and then I haven't been able to watch it since. Anytime someone suggests it, it's a hard pass for me because I just feel so uncomfortable watching that.
I think the first time that I saw The Sixth Sense, that one got me.
Yeah.
It's because some of those scenes, especially the scene where like the ghost of the woman is in the kitchen and
Yes.
she turns and she's got those cuts and she just like rushes up on the boys like, look. I was
Yeah.
like, whoa. Or like
Yeah. Scary movie. It is a
or
scary
when the
movie.
one kid was there and he turns and like half of his like skull's gone,
Yeah.
And
And
you're just,
I think back to the first time I saw like people at the top of the stairs hanging with nooses or
yeah.
something. That was very scary stuff.
I think that was the last one that really scared me.
Yeah.
And it was only the first time, right? Because I've
Yeah.
seen that movie lots of times. And it's
Uh,
definitely worth a rewatch because
yeah.
you know, like the twist, and then you go back and rewatch it, all the signs are there, you know.
That movie pairs well with Stir of Echoes for me. It kind of feels
Yeah.
like a similar kind of
Yeah.
thing. Okay, so next question. What drew you to submitting to our call for submissions? For those who haven't seen the call, it asked for suburban psychological social horror, and I gave some kind of examples of the sort of thing I had in mind. I'm wondering what drew you to it, and I know you heard about it from me, but I don't know if you came across it anywhere else.
I've come across it just in places where you've posted it, right?
Gotcha.
But it was after that you told us. You know,
Yeah.
I feel like we kind of had a heads up just because.
Yeah, the Horror Writers Association
Yeah,
members
right.
definitely got the leg up.
Yeah. But what drew me to it was one, it's a new press and it's yours, and I want to support it. Kind of got that idea pretty quickly after you gave the general like theme of it. And then when you like define the theme more, I'm like, ooh, I don't know if this is gonna fit. I'll let you decide. Boom.
Yeah. I was glad that it did.
Me too.
And I appreciate that support. It was such an unknown how many submissions I might get, and will this work and will this not?
And you never know how many you're going to get, and it may vary from open call to open call. You know, I've had some where I got tons of submissions, and some where I barely got enough to fill the book. You know, and had to extend the call. So it's weird, like how it works, and just how viral it can get one time, and then the next time you're like pulling teeth to get people to see it and submit and whatnot. So that, you know, there was that. Plus, I just like the idea of the theme.
I'm a big fan of finding the unnerving and the disturbing in the mundane, because that's the stuff everybody experiences. And for those of us who don't experience exactly the same thing, we get that empathetic view. There are a lot of stories in this collection. There are 35 stories in all, and there are a good number of them that are about kind of personal experiences of othering, of being forced to the outside or mistreated in some way, and seeing that ratcheted up. And there are these other stories that are just about, well, what if? I think I would categorize yours as more of the what if. Exactly.
For sure, yeah.
But
you know, I had other ideas too for your call, and I didn't know like how political or not, you know, to get with some things. You know, when we talk about like because it just sparked my memory when he said the otherness, right?
Yeah.
I definitely have stories I write these days that are about that, generally about like trans issues. And then I wrap them in a horror kind of trapping, you know. But I never know like who's open call are going to be kind of accepting of those kinds of issues, or maybe they don't want to touch them, those types of things, you know. So I usually save them for ones that I feel 100% would be good. And then I had that other idea pop up. I was like, okay, this will be hopefully this will be a good fit.
Well, that's interesting. And it makes me wonder how best to communicate my openness to all kinds of stories.
Oh yeah. And I'm not saying like there was any overt like feeling. I just didn't.
Right. I get it. I get it. Definitely. Cool. Well, I'm glad you did. And only a couple more questions. First is like, what is next for you? This video probably won't be seen for a long time after the filming of it. And so what do you got going on in the next year? What are your goals? What do you hope to do in the next year or two?
So I have a collection of short stories, a new collection of short stories that I'm putting together right now that will hopefully be out later in the year. And I'm also outlining my next book, and I hope to get started writing that one soon. And it's based off of a short story that I wrote a couple years ago. Kind of a nod to the old like 80s and 90s sci-fi horror shows like, you know, Critters and The Blob and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's about a meteor that hits the wilderness outside of a small Utah town, and then it had something on the meteor and it starts infecting the townsfolk.
Cool.
So I got that going. Hopefully, you know, by the time this comes out, maybe it'll be done and have a home. Who knows?
Awesome. I hope so. Well, thanks for your time, Sylvia. And you're going to be appearing in our anthology, Cost of Living, writing as crlangille.
Mhm.
And we want everybody to look for your press too, Timber Ghost Press, and whatever great things are coming out of that. And we appreciate your perspective, and thanks for submitting.
Yeah, thanks for having me.